What flowers to sow in September? If you like flowers and you want to fill your garden with colour, form, beauty and scent, then seed sowing is the way to go. And if you want a slice of this for yourself, don't miss out on today's September sowing suggestions. All of this, plus an inspirational YouTube gardener with their one seed that if you sow nothing else, you have to sow this. Before we get started with this month's recommendations, one quick reminder. I'm in Ireland and your own local growing conditions may well be different to mine. I hope they are today. The link up above will take you to my full seed sowing playlist. That way you can pick a different month if your season is either ahead or behind of mine. And of course, don't worry about writing down all of these flowers. You'll find all of my seed lists over at my website, niallgardens.com, and in the description down below. Now, let's find somewhere dry and get out of this rain. September truly is a brilliant month for sowing some flower seeds, and that's because you can get seeds started, plants grown on, and then you're going to have nice sturdy plants that will overwinter and give you early flowers and abundant flowers next year. So let's kick off this month's seed recommendations with 3 really good hot coloured perennials. So the first one in my seed tin of perennials are these Lupins, and I visited a brilliant garden last week that's owned by Majus, who has her own channel called Spuds and Roses. I'll link it up above, and she had the most beautiful lupins there. I'm sure you're all familiar with lupins, those tall spires of flowers. They look beautiful, but in particular Majus had really gorgeous deep red ones, and that's what I want. So I've ordered some myself. The particular ones I've gone with are Lupin the Pages, and they have that really dark, deep carmine red colour. It's going to give that real pop of colour next year. Get them started now, grow them on, and you'll have them ready for next year. My next choice has to be Heleniums. Now you can get annual Heleniums and you can get perennial Heleniums, but the big thing is have a look online and you're almost certain to find one that is going to suit you. And that's because they come in such a huge range of really lovely hot colours. Everything from deep reds, going through to rusty reds, going through to oranges, golds and yellows, you name it, there is a shade for you. The flowers are really interesting. They have these really thick, kind of round, chunky centres to the flowers, almost like imagine an echinacea flower, but not as pointy, it's rounded, and then you have these lovely petals around it that either sit horizontally out, almost like a sunflower, or they're pitched back. They look so striking, the colour's brilliant, and once they start flowering, they're really prolific, and they're going to add so much colour into your garden. So get online, get to your garden centre, get to a seed catalogue, and pick yourself some really nice Heleniums. And my final choice of a great hot coloured perennial flower to sow this month has to be Monarda. And Monarda have the most beautiful, deep, pinky, purpley red. It's quite hard to describe because they are red flowers, but rather than being an orangey red or a pillar box red, they just have that tinge of magenta or purple in them that just shifts that colour into a shade of red that I adore. The flowers themselves have the most interesting structure. They're quite chunky, lumpy kind of flowers, but then with these really beautiful petals on the top. I find them fascinating, but the other thing that's great is they are an absolute bee magnet. In fact, one of the types of Monarda that I have here in the garden is called Bee Happy, and that is because the bees just will cover it. It's a great thing to grow, it looks beautiful, and it's going to be great for the wildlife in your garden. It wouldn't be September and it wouldn't be autumn without talking about sowing some really nice hardy annuals. And I've got 3 lovely light airy picks for this month. But just remember that these are not the only hardy annuals that you can sow right now. Any hardy annual can be sown all the way through the autumn. You've got plenty of time and you've got plenty of choice. So I'm going to link another video up above. Go and check that out because that goes into even more detail about more great hardy annuals that you can sow in the autumn. But for this month, first recommendation has to be this. It's Ammi Majus. You've heard me talk about this before in previous months because you can sow it early on in the spring, and what it gives you is that lovely light white frothy flower look, a bit like cow parsley, but without it being rampant and weed-like like cow parsley. I really like it, but what I have found is that sowing it in the spring means that the plants are just that little bit thinner, that little bit weedier, and I've had more success by sowing them in the autumn, bringing them through the winter with a little bit of protection so that they're nice stocky plants, and then you get great flowers. But something similar to that, but different, is this. This is Orlaya Grandiflora, another great flower to sow now and over winter. It's got, again, those lovely umbel-shaped flowers that are in white, light and frothy and airy, but the flower structure is different. It's got like a slightly tighter center and then slightly flatter white petals as well. I like having both of them growing because it does just give that little bit of variation between the two, and I think it's worth starting for yourself. And finally, my third hardy annual recommendation is not in my tin because I haven't grown it before. I ordered the seed and lo and behold, it has not arrived in time for the video, and it's Bupleurum. I have seen it in videos, I've seen it in photos, and I really love it. It has those lovely little lime green flowers with green bracts around them, I think. What it does is it gives you this really lovely look, a bit like Euphorbia, which is a look I particularly like. I like having a mix of flowers, some hot reds, some whites, but I also like green flowers. And Bupleurum gives you exactly that. It gives you the look of Euphorbia, but it's an annual, and crucially, it doesn't have sap that's going to irritate your skin badly, and it's not toxic. So it's a much better choice for a lot of people, and it's definitely worth trying. So if you fancy trying it and you haven't tried it before, get some seed yourself. I've got my seed certainly on the way, and we'll sow it together and we'll see how it gets on next year. For this month's one seed that if you sow nothing else, you have to sow this, I have got a fabulous Irish gardener who I know, whose garden I visited, it's really pretty special by the way, and whose knowledge and advice I really respect. It's Rachel from her channel, Gardening at Douentza.
Hi there everyone, I'm Rachel from Gardening at Douentza YouTube channel, and today I want to tell you about the one seed that in September, if you can't sow anything else, you absolutely should sow this. And my seed is the amazing, the fantastic harbinger of spring. Now when you think of spring, what do you think of? You think of very, very early flowers and primroses. Now, the name primrose comes from the Latin prima rosa, first flower, and I think it's so apt. And we're all peering at the ground at that point in time, waiting for the primroses or waiting for any sign of life. So it's just a wonderful thing to look out for. It's one that is easy to sow, and I suppose many people can be put off primroses by the garish examples that you can find for sale in garden centres. What I'm talking about growing are primroses that have substance and primroses that will persist in your garden and come back year on year, proper perennial primroses. But you know, whereas I don't like bling, I definitely like things that are a bit flamboyant and a bit showy, and there's so much variety in primroses. There are doubles, which are my absolute favourite. There are scented, and there are quirky little ones such as the hose and hose that have green calyxes that come up and kind of cup the flower in a really charming way. And here I have a bunch of primrose seeds that I sowed at this very time last year, and you can see how already I have substantial plants. This one here has even flowered already. You can see the flower spike. So what do you do? How do you sow primrose seeds? And the answer is don't do it in your greenhouse. No. This is a temperate plant, one that's evolved to deal with our cold climates. So it actually needs the cold to germinate. When you sow your primrose seeds, leave them outside in a sheltered, shady spot over winter, and your seeds will germinate in spring. When you sow your primroses, you can use purpose-bought seed compost, or you can mix your own with 50% ordinary potting compost and 50% horticultural sand. Now, primroses need light to germinate, and a little trick I have is to put the compost into your pot or into your tray, cover it over with horticultural grit, and then sprinkle your seeds on top. Horticultural grit makes sense with any seedlings that are being placed outdoors. It just weighs them down a little bit so that they don't get blown away. There is no need to cover your seeds, just make sure that they stay moist, and early next spring they'll reward you by germinating. You may have flowers that same year, like I've had with this one here. If not, they'll flower the following year. And if you've used mixed seedlings like these, then goodness knows what colours you're going to get. It's such fun to look out for them. And if you're sowing seeds of mixed varieties, make sure not to discard the runts of the litter. In horticulture, it's good practice to discard the runts normally, but with mixed seedlings, it could be that the most gorgeous flowers, the red ones for example, are the ones that germinate last. So if you discard all the runts, you're going to get rid of all your red flowers, and we certainly wouldn't want that. Okay, primroses in September. Do it. Sow some.
We've got primroses here in the garden as well, and I have to agree with Rachel that they really are just a great thing to grow. Make sure to head across to Rachel's channel, Gardening at Douentza, and subscribe. I've linked her channel up here. Her plant knowledge is just huge. She has an interesting range of really rare and interesting, unusual plants, and her videos are full of great gardening advice. I know you're going to love it. I know you will. Thanks, Rachel. I'll link her up here, and I'll link her down here also. If you watch my monthly seed sowing videos, you'll know that I recommended earlier in the year that you can sow Aquilegia. Well, now is a good time to sow it as well. And you can see exactly why. The seed heads now are properly mature, they've ripened, they're drying out. Well, not today, they're not drying out. They're drying out and they're opening, which means that naturally the plant would be ready to set seed properly. I love Aquilegia because they come in such a range of colours. Everything from whites to creams and buttery yellows, pinks, purples that are almost blue, lovely pinky reds, you name it. The flowers have a really interesting structure, and I particularly like the structure of the seed heads as well. So you've got loads of interesting form all the way through the year. Start some seeds off now, and you're going to have plenty of flowers for next year. And the great thing is, if you leave the seed heads on the plant, they're going to self-seed really readily. So if you like the flowers over years, you're going to get more and more. My next recommendation is something that links back to one of my hardy annuals that I spoke about earlier. I mentioned Bupleurum. Well, the next thing that I want to recommend is this Euphorbia seed. And this comes with a little bit of quite literally a health warning. Euphorbia is irritant if you get its sap on your skin, and it is a toxic plant. But what it gives you is this really brilliant pop of bright lime green colour in its flowers and its bracts. It's really nice for flower arranging, and it looks brilliant in the garden because as nice as having really bright colourful flowers are in terms of, you know, pinks, blues, reds, yellows, whites, I think it's really good to have green flowers as well. So Euphorbia, if you start it now, I know most people are used to going out to buy Euphorbia plants, but if you get the seed now, you can start it and you can grow it yourself. And of course you have the benefit from seed that you can grow way more plants at a much lower price than you could if you were just buying the plants. And then my very final recommendation for this month is something that I think is a really interesting choice, and it's a plant that I really love, and it is Eryngium or sea holly. Now, it is definitely different when it comes to flower and when it comes to look, because if you're not familiar with sea holly has really spiky, tough, spiny leaves, but the flowers as well are really spiny and hard. But what it does is it creates a really good foil for other things. If you have like nice soft planting, then you're going to get those really spiky flower forms. They come in brilliant colors. You can get ones that are a pale white, almost gray green tone, or you can get ones that are really bright blue. They add so much interest and they are something really different for the garden. And that's what I'm wanting to recommend to you, are seeds for plants that you may not initially think of, to give you that different color, that different kind of interest and that different form. And that is exactly what these are going to give you. Growing flowers is just such a great thing to do, but I really think that you need to consider vegetables and edibles at the same time. It's that mix of plants that brings richness to your garden. So before you reach for that seed catalogue or start to sow anything, make sure that you watch this short video also to help you make great vegetable seed choices. And until next time, hopefully with much nicer weather, see you later.